Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So this is probably going to be our last Market Watch for the year 2023, and we're going to wrap up the year with some pretty big heavy hitting cards. Sure, there are some cards that go from like $5 to $10, and those price jumps are usually very profitable for us, but at the same time it can be a lot of fun to make note of cards that are just hitting ridiculous prices, especially when logic tells us that maybe they should be headed in the other direction. These are absolutely going to be big cards as we go into the year 2024, so we want to keep these in mind as we start the new year. Let's get started. Alright, so to kick things off, we're looking at MST.TV Glory of Horus. So the Horus engine has been proven to be one of the best in the entire game. Maybe not as strong as the Diabell Star cards, but still an amazing one nevertheless. It provides decks with access to rank 8 monsters and the ability to bring out multiple bodies every single turn, but also a way to get key cards into the graveyard from the hand as well. There are several decks in the format right now that are looking to use the engine, most notably Centurion, which is looking for access to rank 8s for protection, as well as the Orcust variants that we see people experimenting with for now. MST.TV is the best card from the Horus archetype. You discard it and another card to search for King Sarcophagus, and then you get to draw a card as well. Obviously this is huge because King Sarcophagus is the card that lets the engine do anything at all, so most of the time if you are running the package, you're using 2 King Sark and 3 MST.TV. MST.TV has been an expensive card ever since it came out. Typically, it has sat around the $45 to $50 mark. However, over the last week or so since the ban list has dropped, we've been seeing more and more players looking to add the Horus engine to their decks, and this theoretical increase in usage has caused MST.TV to jump up to $70 per copy. Now this will have to be validated once we finally have some events happening, because we're not yet sure if everyone is just wanting to try out Horus, or if it's actually going to elevate decks and see significantly more play within the format than it did last format. Either way, as a brand new engine, I'm expecting the Horus cards, particularly MST.TV, to remain expensive for the next several months, and likely sit between the $60 to $70 range. Since we're talking about the Horus engine, it makes sense to also briefly talk about number 90, Galaxy Eyes Photon Lord. This card is a generic rank 8 monster, and while it does have an effect where it interacts with Photon or Galaxy cards, what we're instead mainly worried about is its middle effect, where if your opponent activates a monster effect, you can detach a material from this card to negate that effect. So basically, number 90 is responsible for being generic monster effect negation for any deck that is able to make rank 8 monsters, and as we've discussed, that's what the Horus engine enables a lot of different decks to be able to do. I believe the main culprit we've been seeing recently is the Centurion deck, since they really only need 1 or 2 cards to be able to do their main combos, so you can add the Horus cards and hopefully be able to set up a negate to ensure that your combo goes through smoothly. Now because of this card's recent increase in usage, the card has jumped up yet again to the $90 price point, with very few quantities available on TCG Player. Now this card was at around $70 before, when the Horus engine started to get popular, but we actually got confirmation that a reprint for it is going to be coming in Battles of Legend Chapter 1, coming out in February of 2024, which is only a couple of months away. When it was initially revealed, it caused number 90's price to drop to around $50 to $55. However, I guess players are really impatient, or they have really short memories, because over the last week or two, this card has surged back up in price once again to that $90 mark. To me, this is a really bad buy. I don't know why players would be so impatient that you have to have it now, rather than just waiting for that reprint a little bit down the road. I guess it does make sense if you have a really big event prior to that February reprint, and you think that adding this card to your extra deck is going to be just a huge difference maker for you. For most of us though, this price jump just doesn't make any sense. Stay clear of this card and just pick up the reprint later. Definitely dump it if you're still holding on to any copies of it. Up next is a card that we did talk about a few weeks ago when it was first on the rise. It's Salaman Rising Phoenix. This card is a rank 4 monster that requires 2 or more fire effect monsters to make. Basically, with all of the fire decks running around right now, this is an extra deck option that enables certain decks to OTK by putting out huge damage. You can turn this card into a World Dragon Zealantis, trigger the effect of the Promethean Princess in the graveyard, and revive this card as well, giving you several huge bodies to attack your opponent with. At the moment, this is a relatively small extra deck package that is used by Rescue Ace and Fire Kings over in the OCG, and players are definitely expecting it to be a standard combo here in the TCG once Phantom Nightmare drops in early February. So for most of its existence, Raging Phoenix hasn't been about a $10 card. When we looked at it at the beginning of December, it had gone up to around $15, and that's when the card really started popping up in OCG lists. Now this card is up to a ridiculous $45 on TCG Player. Now, to be fair, the card only came out in Soul Burning Volcano, which is probably one of the most underwhelming sets of all time, though to be fair, sealed boxes of that set have gone up in the past week or so as well, from $30 to $40. I guess it could be fun to gamble on since you can also pull cards like Salaman Great of Fire or Volcanic Trooper, or even a Ghost Rare Sunlight Wolf, but outside of those things, there's not too many crazy money cards in there. I do think that Raging Phoenix is gonna stay around the $35 to $40 mark. Maybe it will cool off a bit in January and then go back up in February once the Promethean Princess is officially available, but if you're bored at locals, maybe packs of Soul Burning Volcano aren't horrible to gamble on if you can still get them for relatively cheap. Next up, I want to talk a bit about Bisal Disper. This card is a level 10 synchro that requires the non-tuner to be a dragon type monster. Fortunately, this is pretty easy to see happen, since the Bestials are all non-tuners, and them being either level 6 or level 8 makes them extremely easy to use alongside level 2 or level 4 tuners. Disper is an extremely useful card, since it functions as an extender, summoning a banished light or dark monster to your side of the field, as well as being able to either destroy or negate an opponent's monster effect by shuffling a banished card back into the deck. I think most players thought that this would be a secret rare, but fortunately it was just an ultra rare back in Cyberstorm Access, making it that little bit more affordable to the player base. So right now I think that players may be looking at Disper a little bit more, specifically in Dragon Link. With the unbanning of Ib, I know that players are looking at incorporating that card and its associated extenders into Dragon Link to help their builds and boards, and Disper fits in very nicely with that strategy. This card was actually relatively cheap early on. I believe that for a while it was only a $15 to $20 card. However, over time it has done nothing but go up in price, and in the past couple of weeks this has continued as it moved from being $30 to now between $35 and $40. This card shouldn't be reprinted in the 2024 tins, though to be fair, given how old Cyberstorm Access is, it might come early. I could definitely see this card or Chaos Angel maybe being reprinted in Maze of Millennia or Battles of Legend next year to make it that little bit more accessible. If not though, expect this card to continue to go up in price as time goes on, especially if Dragon Link finds a way to become a top tier deck once again. One more generic one before we get into a couple of specific cards, let's look at Access Code Talker. So Access Code is one of the craziest cards that's ever been printed in the entire game. Not being able to respond to its summon or its pops is really scary, and it means that this card is absolutely amazing to end games with. On top of that, it can be made with a Link 3 and then any other effect monster, so it's easy to climb into. I think it's not something that can see play in every format. For instance, in Kashtira, you couldn't make this card if your Link monsters were getting banished, or at least it wouldn't be worth going into since you wouldn't be able to boost its attack points or pop anything. That said, Access Code seems to be in almost everyone's extra decks over in the OCG, a sign that the card is likely going to see an increase in usage here. In fact, I think that for the most part you're either playing the World Dragon Zealantis and Raging Phoenix package, or you're playing something like Selene and Access Code. That being said, all versions of Access Code are starting to trend up, and they were never really all that cheap in the first place. The golds came out back in 2021, and then about a year ago it had another reprint in Battles of Legend Crystal Revenge. For a while, those two reprints brought the price of Access Code down to around $20 for the more accessible printings, but the card was never exactly easy to pull, and it's done nothing but go up since. In fact, right now, the gold rares have gone up to around $35 to $40, the reprint secrets have more than doubled up to $45, while the originals from Eternity Code are now up at $55. This card is definitely extremely iconic and will likely be a threat as long as it's legal in the TCG because of its ability to win games entirely on its own. Hopefully 2024 will finally be the year where we see Access Code get another reprint that makes it truly more accessible to budget players. Moving on, this one I think is a bit of a weird one. It's Pressured Planet Raitsoth. Now apparently, Raitsoth is trending once again, though I'm not exactly 100% sure why that is. Raitsoth is the searcher for the Kashtira archetype, searching for a Kashtira monster on activation, giving your monsters a small stat boost, and providing an additional pop if you use the effect of Kashtira Shangri-Ira. Now a couple of lists ago, we saw a Rise Heart finally banned, so I think that for most people, they took this as a sign that Kashtira is just sort of dead. People tried to play it as a deck with a bunch of huge beaters that took advantage of the disruption provided by Fenrir, Unicorn, and Ogre, since you could also play very disruptive cards such as D-Shifter and Dimensional Fissure, but the deck just really wasn't that great. Now, after the most recent list, it seems like a weird time for players to want to look at Raitsoth or Kashtira again. The deck didn't really get any tools back at all. I'm looking at two different things as possible explanations. One is that players just really like Kashtira, and with everything else getting weaker, they want to try the deck out again and think it might be viable. The other thing I'm considering is that players are picking up Raitsoth as a one-of to splash into different decks. Fenrir is already pretty splashable, so running Raitsoth is like running an extra Fenrir that thins out your deck by an extra card, and the small stat boost doesn't hurt at all either. Actually, this is probably pretty good if you don't run any field spells in your deck already, or maybe you do and this is an alternative search target for terraforming. I think that right now, it's probably decent in decks like Labyrinth, Unchained, Vanquish Soul, and maybe even Fire Kings, all decks that are known for adding in Fenrir pretty regularly. Because of this, or for whatever reason people are looking at Raitsoth, the card has gone up from $20 before to now being just over the $40 mark. Kind of crazy and unexpected, as this price jump happened out of nowhere. Raitsoth is from Photon Hypernova, which is the earliest set that will be included in the 2024 tins, but then again it could get treated just like Perlerino given how much the deck has been hit, and just not get reprinted at all. If you guys do know if there's some other reason that Raitsoth is currently trending out of nowhere, make sure that you guys let us all know down in the comments. Alright, finally we're going to look at Superstar Slayer Typhon. So Typhon is actually one of the craziest Xyz monsters in the game, and probably the best one that's being used right now. I feel like in a lot of sets, this card would be the best one in there. However, Typhon came out in Age of Overlord as an Ultra, and it is competing in terms of value with cards like SP, Imseti, and Wanted. Typhon is a card that can just be thrown out onto the field if your opponent summoned 2 or more times from the extra deck this turn or last turn, but it has to be the last summon that you conduct this turn. It also stops both players from using the effects of monsters with 3,000 or more attack points, and you can also detach a material from it to non-targeting bounce a monster on the field. Overall, I think this card is extremely versatile. It's even more versatile than Zeus, since with Zeus you usually have to run a couple of dedicated Xyz monsters to be able to go into it. Specifically this format though, I think that Typhon is a really strong card in Labyrinth. Labyrinth can lock you into only fiends from the deck and extra deck, so Typhon can still be made. On top of that, you'd typically want to run 2 to 3 Typhon, since you may banish a copy or 2 off of Pot of Extravagance. The other place that this card is good is in Unchained, though obviously the deck is a lot weaker now with Sharvara hit to 1. For a while, I feel like this card was really undervalued. It's been sitting at around $20 for most of its lifetime since release. However, just over the last little while, the card has finally been trending upwards and it now sits at $27 to $28 each. I don't know, I feel like if I compare this card to Dissipator, Typhon is a much more useful and splashable card, yet Dissipator is at a higher price point. The only reason that Typhon isn't higher right now is because the set that it's from is so good and has so many other good cards, it pushes the price of Typhon just that little bit lower. This card is absolutely something that almost every extra deck should have in it, so if you don't own a copy of this card, I would make sure that you pick one up while it's still relatively affordable. There's a good chance that it will continue to go up over time, as we likely won't see it reprinted for quite a while. Alright guys, that is all we have for today's episode. 2023 was definitely an interesting year for Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of cool things happening. I hope that all of you have a great time celebrating with your loved ones. Make sure that you guys are all being safe, and we'll see you guys next year. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below, and hit subscribe if you guys haven't already. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.